Hello and welcome to episode 56 of Handgun Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Machad from the wild woods of central Maine, and this is your home for all the news, information, and discussion in the handgunning world. This week, I'm joined by regular guest Weerd Beard to discuss ballistic performance and why some bullets are better than others. So as always, Handgun Radio is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network, and Brownells helps make Handgun Radio possible. Selection, service, and satisfaction. Find it all at Brownells. If you're doing any shopping with Brownells, please use our affiliate link, handgunradio.com/Brownells, to help support the show. So how you doing this week, Weerd?
I'm doing all right.
So we'll head into the week in review. Weerd, what did you do this week?
Not a whole lot, a whole ton of family stuff. Just honey-do list was a mile long. But the one thing in guns that I did manage to do, well, first up, I'm going to let you berate me and anybody else who wants to. I still have not bought the supplies I need for that Walker Colt clone. I still need to get some nipples and that nipple wrench and a powder measure and possibly a powder flask. Though I'm kind of confused about that. Do you use a flask with yours?
I do not. I bought the Cabela's. I think it actually came with it, the starter kit that just has like the plastic flask, and I mean that's more convenient. If you have one of the nozzles on the flask that will actually measure out the specific amount of powder, as opposed to just something that just pours out a bunch if you keep it held up.
Well, I'm looking at the measure that has the little nozzle at the little swing out nozzle at the end. But the question is, I've got it's just a regular powder bottle that I've got, so it's just got the big mouth. So I'm thinking I may actually steal some test tubes from the lab and throw those in my range bag.
One thing I like to use, and I know a lot of other people use it, is they'll take like a 38 special case or something like that, or a 45 ACP case will actually probably work pretty decent too. Or I use the Lee powder dippers, the ones that come in that big long kit, the yellow dippers.
Yep.
And I took a piece of wire and I ran it around the extractor groove of the back of the case and then just twisted the wire and made a little scoop with the handle, and that's what I use to go into the powder measure, and then I dump it in the cylinder in the chamber.
Ooh, we got some nice safety wire kicking around the lab. I may have to do that.
I mean, as long as the wire is stiff enough. I think I used, I don't remember what it was, some stuff we had on a roll down in the basement, but I mean that worked fine, and I just used that case as a scoop, and I just come right out of the bottle of powder and then just go right into the powder measure, make sure it's right, and then into the chamber, and then obviously make sure your big bottle of powder is away from you when you're shooting.
Yep.
But no, that seems to work well for me, and I very rarely use the measure, only if I'm going out somewhere where I can't bring like the table and stuff. Usually if I'm out shooting the black powder gun, I try to bring the table with me just because it's such a pain to try to do stuff on the ground and whatnot.
Yep. So, but the one thing I did do was I was looking online to see what the ammo shortages were looking like with this whole Russian embargo business, and I found that Silver Bear ammo is still readily available. So I picked up a case of 9x18 millimeter. So because I was running a little bit low, so now I got a pant load of the stuff.
So gonna get out there and shoot your CZ82 and your P64.
Well, the P64 not as much because that gun's just ugly to shoot. It's really a novelty, but the CZ82 is an awfully fun gun to shoot.
Yeah, that's a little bit bigger, right? It's probably the same size, as maybe a little bit bigger than a PPK.
It's a double stack Walther PP if you want to kind of imagine how it works. I mean, they've completely changed everything else on it, but they started off with the Walther PP in design.
Well, and people think those smaller pistols, like, oh yeah, it shoots 9x18, doesn't kick that bad. They do have quite a little snap to them. I mean, it's for some people. I know with me shooting a P64, it kind of hurt because it's just so thin. I think a lot of that force is just directed into one area on your hand.
Well, also, I mean, I heard you talking in one of the earlier shows about thinking about getting a North American Arms autoloader.
Yeah.
You were saying that I know you'll be talking about the LCP in just a second, but talking about the LCP not being super comfortable in your hand and thinking a steel gun will do better. But I kind of wonder if you'll be doing that much better. I mean, besides the fact that, well, if you go straight to a 380, it might not feel that much better, only because it's a straight blowback. You've got a lot more recoil than when you've got a locked breech gun.
Like the LCP, which isn't straight blowback like most of them.
Yep. Well,
That was
it used to be like most of them, but nowadays almost all of them have some sort of lock breech.
right. I thought it was weird when I first looked at the LCP. I was like, that's strange. Usually the barrel's fixed to the frame, and you don't have this tilting barrel. I mean, what prevented people from doing that before now?
Well, nothing. I mean, the earliest one I can think of is the Colt Mustang is a that's got a CZ75 action in it, so it's got that kidney shaped cam action to it that works the locking system. Then it locks up like a Browning high power.
Excellent. So my week in review, I got some new cleaning products in for testing, so be sure to go check out the review, which will be posted probably this week or next week over at the Firearms Insider, and also check out the other great reviews. TJ just did one on the, I believe it's the Glock MIC holster, and it's basically a piece of Kydex that clips around the trigger guard with a piece of string that allows you to attach it to your belt. So it's for certain styles of carry that otherwise would be unsafe to do with a Glock handgun or pretty much any handgun for that matter. And the holster allows you to do it. So be sure to go check that out. There's a link in the show notes. Also, I'd like to say thanks to listener Mark for the care package of deprimed and cleaned 38 Special and 9mm brass. It was really appreciated. Mark also included something pretty curious. It was a couple of casings that I had never, ever seen before. They are marked IMT, and they have a very large ledge on the inside near the web of the case. So if you look at the case and you look at the inside of it, probably halfway down there's this little ledge that runs all the way around. So the inside of the case body actually gets thicker. So there's less room for the powder. And it's kind of interesting. Everything I've found suggests they come from a company called Freedom Munitions, and they can cause you problems with the reduced case volume. I believe there was another company, Ammo Land or something like that, where they were head stamped that way. And people have talked about them online. At first, when I looked at the IMT, I thought maybe it was from, remember when Uzi used to make that real hot 9mm for subguns and people were putting them in pistols? I thought maybe, yeah, I thought maybe that that IMT was Israeli military technologies, because usually they're referred to as IMI.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know if that was from them, and that thicker case wall was maybe something to help contain the pressure from that hot 9mm round. But from what I understand, it was just, everybody said, or the company just said, oh, it's just part of the manufacturing process. But if every other 9mm case doesn't have that, I don't understand why it would be specific to their brand.
Is it right? Is it right near the head?
If you look inside the case, you go halfway down, and this little ledge comes out, and it basically almost looks like you took a smaller casing, like a 32 case or a 380 case, and stuck it inside the 9mm.
That's weird.
Yeah, so it looks like at first I looked at it, I said, oh, there's a case stuck in there or something, but so it looks like you stuck another case inside of it, and there's that little ledge that runs inside. It's nothing I've ever seen before.
What if that's to prevent bullet setback? Because at first I thought it was for pressure, because if it was right down near the webbing between the head and the start of the case wall, that's where the majority of the pressure goes. And so if you strengthen that up, I mean, that's like the belted magnums. Part of that was for head spacing, but also part of it was for pressure control. But if it's up higher, like you said, I wonder if it's so that the bullet sits flush up against that little ledge, and
that's what
that back, and it won't it and depending on what machine they're using, keeps it from getting set too deep.
That's what I was thinking. My friend the Australian was looking at it, and he said maybe that was because they were using like a real heavy 9mm bullet, like 147, or even maybe higher. Maybe it was something else, and they were just not having, rather than having to deal with overall length, just say seat the bullet until it stops, like you said. So I mean, I don't know. If I find anything else, I'll make sure I let you guys know, or I'll post something on the Facebook page.
Yeah, I'd say you could probably use 357 Magnum loads for it, and you'd probably be all right.
Yeah. So also coming up soon here, I have a holster coming in that I'm going to be reviewing for the Firearms Insider, and I'm going to switch over from carrying my Model 60 that I normally carry, and I've talked about a lot here, and I'm going to be carrying the Ruger LCP in 380. So I'm going to be using some Speer Gold Dot 380 loads. I believe they're plus Ps, but I'm not sure. I bought the box a long time ago. And I'll be carrying those in that pocket holster, so next week I'll be sure to show you guys on air what that's looking like and how it's going. And Weerd will probably give me some crap because I'm carrying an even smaller gun than my Model 60.
I got to tell you, man. I mean, it would be fine if you lived in Texas or Florida or something like that, but Maine doesn't get that hot.
Oh, come on. It was 87 degrees up here today.
Yeah, yeah. All of our listeners south of the Mason-Dixon line are throwing stuff at their computers right now.
All right, well, that about wraps up the week in review, so we're going to head into the main topic, which is going to be bullets and ballistics. So there's endless pontification in the shooting world about choosing the best ammo and people having the bullet that will give you the best one-shot stop, which really doesn't exist. How much of this is straight hyperbole, and how much of this can you bet your life on? And that's a question you see a lot online and stuff like that. So does that gimmicky-sounding bullet actually deliver the terminal performance that they claim? To understand the limitations of some of these newer magic bullets and some of the actual street-proven rounds like the Spear Gold Dot, we're going to first have to understand the physics and the biology that go into what makes an effective bullet in terms of terminal performance. So when we say terminal performance, humans are not big solid blocks. We're not, like bricks and concrete, stuff like that. A great deal of our bodies are made up of water, and therefore we're very malleable. And because of this, the effects of hydrostatic shock can be really devastating. The hydrostatic shock is when that bullet enters the body. It's not only transferring and causing damage, but it's transferring energy because the bullet is carrying energy. And it's causing a shock wave throughout the body. We're made out of water, so it's like Weerd is kind of giving an example later on that when you're going through the water and you have the wake behind a boat, you see it make all the waves and then it slowly dissipates. That's sort of the same thing. A bullet entering the body generally does its damage in two ways, the temporary wound cavity and the permanent wound cavity. Both have their different ways of harming the body, but I recently heard it put in the simplest terms possible. Temporary wound cavity makes you stop what you're doing, and permanent wound cavity kills you. So, Weerd, what are your thoughts so far on this?
Well, I mean, definitely with the temporary wound cavity, especially since this is handgun radio and we're going to be talking about handgun bullets, is a lot more controversial, and there's not really a whole lot of papers out there. There's actually a whole bunch of really cool scientific papers where people have done all sorts of things from, anesthetizing pigs and shooting them and stuff like that. There's some pretty crazy studies out there. But the permanent wound cavity is really well documented. It makes perfect sense. It's just the hole that bullet punches into you, and there's no arguing with it. It either hit you or it didn't. As far as the temporary wound cavity, there's a lot more controversy as far as what it does, especially when we're dealing with pistol bullets.
Well, and you see, like, a lot of people will look on YouTube and they'll see people doing ballistics gel testing, and while that can kind of approximate what happens in the human body, there's a whole lot of different structures inside the body that are going to affect how that bullet performs. Did the bullet strike a piece of bone as it entered? Did you get a hit straight on the sternum? What did it do when it hit? Stuff like that. And also, the permanent wound cavity can be observed well after the incident. Whereas the temporary wound cavity, unless you have an X-ray machine on somebody and you have a high-speed camera, you're not going to be able to see that, thus the name temporary. So the permanent wound cavity is just what you expect, the hole left by the bullet as it travels through the target. And if the round is expanding, the cavity will be getting bigger as the round penetrates. So the damage from this is caused by all the tissues that are cut, crushed, smashed, and the direct impact of the bullet, along with any other bone structure damage and stuff like that. The temporary wound cavity is just the temporary hole caused by the bullet pushing the material out of its way. We go back to the boat's wake in a body of water example. It'll move things around, but once the energy is dissipated, it's going to disappear. The damage caused by temporary wound channels with pistol bullets is somewhat debatable, like Weerd said. We've seen a lot of stuff with rifle rounds, especially people talking about the 223 and it yawing as it enters and becoming destabilized and causing a large, sometimes shallow temporary wound cavity. But the damage caused by temporary wound cavity with pistol bullets is kind of sketchy at this point. With pistol ammo, there's hemorrhaging of smaller vessels, and it is possible, but there is data that suggests that the temporary wound channel can disrupt nerves function for a moment, which can lead to stopping power. If you disrupt the nervous signals going from the brain to the other parts of the body, that'll also cause the person to cease what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot more. We could be talking a lot more about temporary wound cavity if we were talking about rifle bullets. You especially hear a lot about it with hunters and things like that, where you can shoot an animal in the neck region, and that bullet will just travel through the soft tissue, but that animal will drop down because that shock wave of the bullet going through and possibly tumbling and expanding and doing all that stuff can actually break the animal's neck and kill them right there and things like that. But with pistol ammo, it's a little bit more iffy. There's definitely talk that if a nerve gets compressed, that'll definitely cause that nerve to stop functioning for a little while. But again, it's not permanently compressed, so therefore it'll start working again as soon as the pressure is off. And I don't know the full effects of, how long does it take to recover, what's the damage done and all that. So it's certainly, if you've got something that does produce a lot of a temporary wound cavity, it's certainly not going to do you any harm. But,
well, then one of the things we might want to draw a distinction between too is I know I'm guilty of this often a lot of the times, not really grasping how big of a difference there is between a rifle round and a pistol round. We think of, oh yeah, he's got the 357 Magnum, that's one of the best one-shot stops around, or he's got a 50 AE. Well, if you think about it, a pistol round, a 357 Magnum, okay, you've got anywhere from 125 grain to 158 grain, maybe doing 1,200 feet per second. Now, your average 30-06 load, what is it, a 168 grain, maybe?
Or, yeah, 168, 150, anywhere from 150 to 180.
Going at like 2,400 feet per second, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, that's a huge difference when we're talking about potential energy of that bullet. All that energy that it's moving down range with at a much faster speed is going to be transferred to the target. That's why, rifle wounds from battle rifle, like caliber weapons, like the Garand, like the M14, stuff like that, are going to be way more debilitating than any pistol round if it's not hit in a vital area.
You also got to remember that that those rounds, I mean, you're talking about like 150. You've got your 125 grain 9mm bullet, which is really fat, but it's also really short. And when you drop it down to 30 caliber and it's 150 grain or 125 grain or something like that, you're dealing with a much longer bullet, which means it's going to be have a lot more potential for tumbling and things like that, which also just does a whole lot more energy transfer and does a whole lot more weird things when it's inside the body.
Now, in terms of stopping power, Weerd, you want to take us through that next one?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. I lost it there. Well, first up, stopping power's got a little bit of a bad name because of a lot of gun magazines and all that started using the term, and it transferred over into the blogs and things like that, and it really kind of turned into a junk science. But it's not 100%, junk science. I mean, we're going to be talking about a little bit more in sort of proven events. And also, before we get going on to this is a super duper macabre, discussion, but we're talking stopping power. We're not talking killing power. I put it, example down of, let's say you shoot somebody in the stomach or shoot somebody in the intestines. That's a awful place to get shot. You're going to get gastric juices all filling through your abdominal cavity. You're going to get fecal matter. All sorts of awful stuff. That very well could be fatal, but it's not going to stop you right away if it doesn't hit anything else. And so therefore, it's not going to do you any favors in terms of defending your life, because that person, if they're determined, they can continue the fight and they can do all sorts of horrible things to you, and then maybe they'll die later. And we don't care about that. And at the same time, when you're talking about handgun rounds, if you're close to a hospital, and close meaning 20 minutes to 45 minutes and all that, most handgun round wounds are survivable. So you can shoot somebody and they will take a serious injury, they will go down, the fight will be over, the police will show up, the ambulance will show up, they'll take the person away, and that person very well may survive, and that's a victory. You're not there to kill the person. You're there to stop them. You're there to end the attack. And the idea of you can't shoot somebody in the chest, have them fall down, but they're still moving, so you put a couple more rounds in their head, because that's suddenly murder.
Well, and the thing is, a lot of people, I don't know how many times I've heard this, why didn't the cop shoot him in the leg? Why didn't they shoot him in the arm? The cop, that's not going to stop whatever nefarious action that person is doing. You need to, putting one in their chest that may be a shallow wound that does injure them, but they still survive, but it stops them because of the sheer shock of the shot. That's going to be way more effective in terms of stopping them and not killing them. Shoot them in the leg, it may not stop them, and you've cut their artery, and now they bleed out. So they're still dead, even though you shot them in the leg and it was safer, like a lot of people believe.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, there's not really any place to shoot somebody on the body and have it be completely 100% sure it's not going to be fatal. Unless there's a few places, if you're really, really careful and place the muzzle right up against it. I saw a documentary a while ago about some dude who wanted to have a gunshot wound scar on his body, and had some weirdo backwaters doctor, he set him up against some sandbags and put a round into him, and there was an ambulance waiting outside. And yeah, but that was super duper controlled factor, and it was a contact wound, sort of factor. But when it comes to actually shooting, if you discharge a weapon, you're executing deadly force, and you very well may kill the other person. You very well may not kill the other person. Stopping them is the only important thing. And actually, you led with the shot to the leg, added into my my next point here, which was the what I don't know if there's a specific term for it. I call it the A zone. I mean, this area of the body is frequently talked about in a lot of different books and things like that. Where it's a triangle. It starts at your Adam's apple in the middle of your throat, goes down to each of your nipples, and it creates a triangle. And that triangle is really the center of mass of the human body. And within that is the entire thoracic cavity. So you've got lungs, you've got arteries, you've got the heart, you've got the spine running down the middle, and all of that. And that is an ideal place to place a shot because it's also the center of mass of the human body. You can move your, think about somebody, standing on the dance floor. They're waving their arms around, they're bobbing their head and all that. Their head and arms are moving extremely fast. I don't know what the miles per hour would be, but it's quick. And, the same thing goes with someone running or moving or things like that. Their legs are moving extremely quick. But that body's more or less staying in the same place. It's not moving very fast because the person's not able to move very fast. And so that is an ideal place to take a shot if that shot presents itself, because it's going to be the slowest moving big target on the body that's going to have the best results if you can manage to get a shot in there.
Well, and the one thing also that people they wonder, why don't they teach headshots a lot? There's a reason for this too. Bullets, while they may be going really fast and have some weight behind them, they are easily deflected. I mean, I've seen bullets deflected by twigs in the woods when you're hunting. There are documented cases, in fact, in Jim Cirillo's book talking about working on the stakeout squad. In his first shooting, he shot this guy 3 times. 2 of the bullets hit on the forehead and skidded around underneath the guy's skull, underneath the skin over the skull, around his head, and then came out the back. The third one, he aimed for 2 points at the end of the eyebrows and then down to just underneath the nose, this triangle, and he aimed right there. That one made it into the skull and ended the fight. But that's one of the reasons why you don't see. I mean, they do the failure drills where you put 2 in the chest and 1 in the head, and those have a limited application. But you don't see a lot of people advocating for, just go for headshots, just because, one, you're going to be in a high-stress situation. Hitting that target, while it's easy on the range for you, may not be very easy when you're, sweaty, your palms are sweaty, you have tunnel vision, and you're in a fight for your life. Hitting a chest-sized target is going to be a whole hell of a lot easier than trying to aim for like a small pie plate type of thing.
Plus, the person's head's going to be bobbing around. I actually also read an interesting story. God, it probably getting close to 10 years ago, of a guy that was robbing a car dealership, and the dealership had been hit a couple of times. So the owner had started sleeping on the couch in the office, and when he heard people breaking into the cars, he grabbed his gun and went out there, and the guy started shooting at him, and he fired a shot, and he found some blood, but there were no people. And later on, when the police were canvassing the usual suspects, this dude's forehead was all messed up, and he had a 9mm round, 9mm Luger, mushroomed up against his skull. And there was actually a discussion that the court was trying to essentially get a search warrant to remove the round from his head to verify that it was the round from the other guy, which I mean, I actually was disliking it because, number one, it's a crappy search warrant, and number two, even if you dig the round out, once a round's been mushroomed that much, how are you going to even know, like, that might be able to tell it's a 9mm, but you're not even going to know what the bullet weight was, let alone who made the bullet, or be able to count the rifling grooves on it.
Right.
But yeah, so rounds can indeed, either traverse around between the scalp and the skull, or they can mushroom right up against the skull and not penetrate. You never know what's going to happen. But also that head's going to be bobbing around. It's going to be moving. People are going to be looking around. People are going to be ducking their head down to either get cover or get down behind their gun sights, and all of that. If that's the only shot that presents itself, that's the only shot that presents itself. But overall, headshots are only good to be aiming at if the person's a terrorist with a suicide vest and his hand's on a detonator.
Well, and also remember back when Reagan was shot, this kind of goes to the caliber argument, but he didn't even realize he had a bullet in him until he started coughing up blood in the limousine after they were leaving the area.
Yep. Well, that's another great example of, he almost died from that.
Yeah.
It was one of those, that was a near, there's a bunch of, near fatal wounds that weren't all that serious. There's also with the Dick Cheney incident where Harry Whittington got a bunch of birdshot in the face. One of those pellets ended up migrating down into his heart and gave him a heart attack while he was in the hospital. And he was in the hospital, so they were able to save him. But, he very well could have died from that shot. But, there was the whole Dick Cheney sleeping off whatever the heck was in his system and all that for that. They definitely didn't call the ambulance right away. He was fine. He was walking around and he was in good shape. I'm sure he wasn't feeling all that good with a face full of birdshot, but it was definitely not a stopping round in any way, shape, or form, but it very well nearly was a fatal one.
Somebody beats me with a round of birdshot, they're going to get an ass kicking. That's all I got to say. So moving into blood pressure, this is another important part of the whole stopping power argument. Our circulatory system requires a certain amount of pressure to force blood throughout our bodies, up and down, side to side, and gravity also works upon that. So without the proper amount of pressure, humans can experience any number of things, including blackouts, dizziness, and other stuff. So causing a leak, quote unquote, in this closed system can cause significant problems, including a loss of blood pressure and a loss of consciousness. Shots to places like the heart, liver, or lungs, or one of the major blood vessels can cause massive bleeding, incapacitation, and pretty quick death, especially if it's a fairly severe wound, especially one of the arteries in your leg or something. Even a person with a hole in their heart will still be able to fight for a few minutes before they either become too weak to function or just, simply pass out from lack of oxygen to the brain. So a single hit to the heart, liver, or lungs may be a one-shot stop, but they may not stop pulling the trigger immediately.
Yeah, that's where the one-shot stop business really starts getting icky. Is you can put a round right through somebody's lung and they're done, or you can shoot somebody in the heart and they can still keep up the fight if they feel like keeping up the fight. And you get that. Hunting is one of the greatest examples. Is talk to any deer hunter. I've known a bunch of guys that have, when they've dressed out the deer, they've just found just a puddle of jelly in the middle of the deer's chest where the heart used to be, and yet meanwhile they had to track that deer for a quarter mile before they found the body. And you think about that, instead of the deer with its main desire to get away, instead it's someone trying to kill you. That can get pretty scary. So that's where the one-shot stop disappears, is because in that time that you hit them and fatally wounded them, you've got lots of chances to keep sending more shots down range to make sure that they continue to not chase after you.
Now, in terms of hit to the nervous system, how do you think that really plays into the whole ballistics argument?
Well, that's closer to a one-shot stop, because your nerves are, they're electrochemicals. So it's instead of causing a drop in blood pressure, which is not instantaneous no matter what you do. You've got to really hit someone with a truck to cause their blood pressure to go from full blood pressure to nothing in less than a second. But a hit to the nerve, if you hit a nerve, it's going to stop working. And so, that's where you get the headshot, business in there. If you shoot somebody and you enter their cranial cavity, they're going to stop. And also this may not be fatal. Look at Gabby Giffords. She's still up and around and all that, but she went down, and she went down hard when she got hit in the head. it just does so much disruption. And then the same thing goes with hitting the spinal column anywhere high up. A neck shot. Any of the shots in the chest regions where if you hit the spine and end up severing the nerve, that's going to be pretty close to one and done.
Well, and think about, someone whacking the edge of their wrist against a door or something, and then all of a sudden either their hand's tingling or twitching, or they can't use it for like 5 or 10 minutes.
Yep.
Multiply that by 100 times, and you kind of get what happens when it gets hit with a bullet.
Yeah, multiply that by forever, really.
Yeah. So in terms of structural damage, these wounds aren't generally potentially as lethal as the others on their own, but they do greatly change the dynamics of the fight. One thing I've heard, I read a lot in the Jim Cirillo book, was that they started realizing that they should rather than taking headshots, were taking shots at the pelvic area, and that was causing the attackers to basically lose their ability to stand, and they would fall to the ground. Broken bones or torn tendons or muscles can greatly hinder an attacker. Someone with a broken arm or a clavicle, the collarbone, will likely be unable to use the limb that's affected by the break. Torn tendons or muscles in the arm can render a hand useless because they're all interconnected. And like we said before, a shattered pelvis or a leg can render the person unable to walk. So all of these will greatly affect the fight, but also note that the guy with the knife or the gun may no longer be able to be a threat if he can't stand, but he still can probably reach up and shoot at you unless he's completely overcome by the pain. But that's not a 100% reliable thing to think it's going to happen.
Yep. I think you've said it all right there.
Perfect. So in terms of survival, how does this play into it?
Well, I mean, this is kind of a both ways. I mean, number one, you've got to remember that a lot of these things, even though technically speaking, if you get that one shot off, because of course also most of the one-shot stops that you've read about and like the studies that they did on them were essentially people that were only able to land one shot, because as a general rule, people are trained to keep shooting till the threat stops. But yeah, so if you hit somebody in anywhere really, they're going to get a lot of pain, and that may be an ending fight. And even somebody with a superficial wound may choose not to continue the fight, and a person with a bullet in their heart may continue to fight until they're dead. So the general rule of thumb is if you need to shoot someone to protect your life, keep shooting. Once something that's worth shooting once is worth shooting twice. Keep shooting till the threat is stopped, and then as soon as the threat has stopped, stop shooting. Killing someone who is attacking you but has stopped attacking is murder. And also this works both ways for both people. Is just because you're shot doesn't mean the fight is over. You can keep fighting. Even if you're fatally wounded, you might save other people's lives by continuing to fight. Sort of idea. I know that there's a lot of talk from especially early cop books where officers will get shot and they'll fall down because that's what happens in the movies. Someone takes a hit and they go down, even though it may not have even been an incapacitating wound. And there's a lot of training to go to keep the fight going. It's not over till it's over. And so that also works for you. If you're defending yourself and that other guy gets the lucky shot off and hits you, keep fighting. You may be fine, you may be dead, but just keep fighting. If you can keep fighting, keep fighting.
Well, and going back to that Jim Cirillo book, there was a tale they had at a hotel, I believe it was over by JFK Airport, and a guy came in and he had a rifle, and they were afraid it was going to penetrate their vest, so they got into the gun battle. One guy went right down, the other guy took, I want to say, 5 or 6 rounds of buckshot, a couple of magazines of a .45, and a bunch of .38 special ammunition before he was done. And if I remember right, they said he took 36 rounds before he stopped fighting.
Yep.
So
there's also the Miami shootout. I mean,
right.
It's one of those, that was the big talk that led up to the creation of the 10 millimeter of, we need to have a more powerful round than 357 Magnum and 38 Special and stuff like that. And it turns out when you look at the autopsy reports, which are all out there online, is all of these guys that kept fighting and kept killing officers, they were dead. I mean, they were not going to live. The hospital was not being able to patch them up, but they were still fighting.
So definitely do not give up if you are the good guy, and give up if you're the bad guy. So moving into the actual hardware here rather than the software, the bullets. So you want to take us through the first one here, Weird?
Yeah, so first up is your basic issue range fodder here, the lead ball and the full metal jacket. And lead, of course, is much softer, so it may deform on impact, and so it will have some, some terminal performance, so to speak. But the jacketed ball rounds and the naked lead are really just going to punch holes straight through things, and they're cheap for target shooting, but overall the wounds and energy transfer they'll give will be considerably less effective in a defensive or hunting scenario. And actually, I've got an interesting story for this. I was actually at a shoot a couple of years back where we were shooting pumpkins. It was October, and we had a whole bunch of pumpkins downrange, and I'd started shooting with my Mosin Nagant, and I was making good hits, but the pumpkins were just kind of moving around a little bit, and I wasn't really all that impressed with the performance. And so I finished off the mag that I had in me, and I racked my Mosin Nagant, and I pulled out my SKS and started shooting that. And the much slower round actually started blowing up the pumpkins, and that was just because those super duper fast rounds, and they were just, I mean, it was all ball ammo, but the super fast rounds weren't even slowing down. They were just screeching right through, but the slower rounds were actually able to transfer more of that energy. And energy that's a bullet traveling through something is essentially wasted. If that bullet's still flying after it hits your target, all of that energy in that bullet was energy not transferred to the target.
Right, and that was one of the reasons that kind of people started going into hollow points, is because it's going to start slowing down and all that energy is going to be transferred. So kind of moving into the hollow points, they generally are a jacketed round, but there are lead hollow points out there, and they can easily be cast by those who make their own bullets. And then you have the semi-jacketed ones that kind of have a copper jacket halfway up with an exposed lead hollow cavity. The rounds are designed to be pressed open when they hit the target, and it accomplishes two things. The mushroom bullet makes a bigger wound track, and some of these bullets I've seen expand up to 60 caliber. And the round slows down like an open parachute inside the target, so that gives you the energy transfer you need. When a round passes through the target, like we said, that bullet, the energy the bullet has as it flies can basically be considered wasted, and you're still responsible where that round goes after it hits your target. Also, the energy dump from an expanded round creates what is called a temporary wound cavity, and basically, like we talked about earlier, it's going to cause a lot of hydrostatic shock in the malleable tissue of the body, and hopefully cause that famous one-shot stop, which can or cannot happen sometimes. One round that you hear a lot about is the 125 grain jacketed hollow point 357 Magnum, and a lot of people, and if I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, Weird, people were talking about how it created a shallow wound cavity but made enough hydrostatic shock that it was causing people to just stop whatever they were doing.
Yeah, I'm actually not super duper familiar with that round, but I mean, I'm familiar with it in the fact that I know that it works, and that's one of the big things you get through is you can do all this work in the lab, but what works out a whole lot better is look to see if people were using it, if it works really, really well. There's definitely been some rounds out there that, in ballistics gel and on, and in all the calculations and all that look like the awesomest thing in the world, but when it comes to shooting at, living targets, it just doesn't do the trick. And then there's other stuff that's, super duper low tech and not interesting, like the FBI 38 special load, the semi, or actually it's just a lead hollow point, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that round.
The NICLAD? Or is that different?
No, I think the FBI load was just a can't remember what the bullet weight is, but it was just a lead hollow point of soft lead, and that thing worked gangbusters. But again, it's just a plus P 38 special. It's nothing fancy, and it's none of these super duper high tech bullets that have all the laser cutting and all the business going on with them. But hey, it works.
Well, and one thing you want to think about is the expansion capabilities of the pistol you're using, of the ammunition you're using, rather, depend upon the pistol you're using. So something like a 38 special, revolver, for instance, if it's using a really heavy jacketed hollow point bullet and it's only coming out of a snub-nosed barrel, you may not have the speed you need to make that thing expand properly. I've seen some bullets that are hollow points act like FMJ because they weren't going fast enough. If I'm not mistaken, Speer came out with a 135 grain jacketed hollow point round that was specifically designed to have low flash and expand at snubby velocities coming out of the J-frames for the New York City Police. But then you also have, like you said, Weerd, the FBI load, and that soft lead, it doesn't need to be going very fast for it to expand properly. So coming out of a short, 1 7/8 inch barrel Smith & Wesson 5-shot, it's probably going to expand pretty much every time.
Yeah, well, and you get the other side of it is I saw a ballistics gel test done by GY6 Vids on YouTube. We can maybe track it down to throw it in the show notes, where he was shooting the Hornady Lever Revolution, or however you pronounce that round, out of a Ruger LCR into gel, and he was getting zero expansion out of those rounds whatsoever because they're designed to be, and he wasn't getting. He was shooting it through a chrono, and he wasn't getting that much of a drop. He was losing, I think, 200 feet per second from what it stated on the box. But those rounds are designed to be shot out of a lever action rifle, and out of a lever action rifle, I'm sure they work wonderfully. But when shooting it out of a snub nose, it just wasn't quite enough heat on that round to get it to open up.
So stepping back when you're carrying the snub nose, stepping back from the high tech and going to the low tech may actually serve you a little bit better.
Yep, that's true. That's actually why I carry Speer Gold Dots in my LCR, is because I actually had a box. It was the only hollow point 357 they had when I first got my first 357. Was some Federal, Game Shock, I think it was. There's some solid copper rounds, and I had those for a little while, but I'm like, I kind of wonder if these are going to expand coming out of even a full size 357 sort of idea, because they're designed for a lever action rifle.
And like you just touched upon there are also some hollow point ammunition that is made out of solid copper. So this will lead to a lighter bullet in general, but sometimes the copper is a little bit harder than lead, and you can often get close to 100% weight retention in an expanded round, but you may also run into instances where the round does not properly expand because it wasn't going fast enough. Yep. So moving into frangible ammo, Weerd, do you want to touch upon that a little bit?
Yeah, so speaking of weight retention, so these are rounds that are designed to have almost no weight retention. There's a couple of different types out there. There's the most common frangibles you'll find are essentially sintered metal powder. So it's essentially a powder of various types of metal. I often see it's like, copper and tin and stuff like that are pressed into essentially a ball round. And then there's also stuff like the G2 Research RIP ammo or the Extreme Shock ammo and things like that are a little bit more complicated in how they're designed. But the sintered frangibles are designed for minimal penetration and zero ricochet. And generally these rounds are used for training or shooting in indoor ranges where people might shoot things like steel targets or potentially hit concrete walls at close range. So these rounds will dump all their energy as soon as it hits something hard. They'll essentially revert back to powder, and this will get rid of your ricochet factor, and it'll get rid of a lot of danger that might have when you're shooting steel at close range. But it's dumping all of its energy, and you might say with powerful rounds like centerfire rifle, it still may be effective for defense. Well, it'll get rid of your over-penetration issues and things like that. If you have a rifle for home defense or something like that, it may not bang through your walls, but it still may do serious damage to it. But with pistol ammo, it'll do make a very, very dramatic shallow wound. I've seen frangible wounds in autopsy photos, and not even autopsy photos, and surviving people, and they're still alive and they're still doing all right, but they've got just a huge chunk of meat blown off their chest or off their back, and but they're still alive. It's very, very dramatic, but it's not particularly good for stopping. And then there's the defensive frangible rounds, which we can talk about in great length. They're designed to break up and create multiple wound tracks. And it may sound like a good idea to make lots of little holes in somebody, but but every new track will be smaller and less powerful than created by the initial bullet, and when it's whole, and you're getting to a lot of chaos there. Is it very well may those additional wound tracks very well may find something vital, or they may not find anything vital.
Well, and talking about frangible ammunition, I did some work with frangibles probably 4 or 5 years ago. Someone had some and they just got rid of them, and I took them out and shot them, and it kind of opened my eyes to the limitations of the frangible rounds, and I certainly would not use them for self-defense. I wouldn't advocate that at all, simply because, say you're putting the magazine into your pistol in the morning when you're getting up and you're getting ready to go out, and you drop the magazine onto a hard floor. I dropped one of those frangible rounds onto one of the concrete floors at the range, and the bullet broke in half. So you don't know the structural integrity of the bullets, because they're basically, like Weerd said, just sintered metal that is pressed together. And so it's designed to break upon impact, and apparently the impact just of dropping it was enough to break that bullet.
Yep, and so we got to start talking about the funky, crazy magic bullets, because it seems like a lot of the heavily advertised and super duper expensive bullets out there are some of these crazy frangibles. We can go way back to, I think it was the 90s was when the Glazer safety slugs started coming out. Or was it earlier than that, or do you know those very well?
I think it was earlier than that. I think those aren't those the ones they have the like the suspended gelatin inside the bullet with the number 2 shot load or something.
There's a couple of different loads. I mean, there's the blue tip, which is a bird shot. And I don't remember which shot level it is. And then there's it's all bird shot. But essentially, you've got a jacket with a plastic cap on the top of it and a big, huge cavity inside. And that cavity is stuffed full of essentially shotgun pellets. And the idea was that it's safer because, of course, if that thing hits, the jacket's going to empty out, the round's going to lose almost all of its weight immediately, and so it's going to have it may penetrate through through a drywall wall or even a plaster wall, but by the time it gets to the other side, it's really not going to be particularly ballistically effective. But the idea was that somehow this is going to do some horrible magicness inside of a human body, but as far as I can tell from everything I've read about them, it just essentially creates just this big, ugly surface wound, but it's not anything that you're not going to walk away from.
Well, looking at here, I mean, this is from Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt, but it's a frangible bullet made by Corbon. The original round was handmade hollow point bullet filled with number 12 birdshot with a flat polymer cap. And then in 1988, to improve ballistic performance, they had a polymer-tipped round ball and the current compressed core. And I guess they produced them from 25 caliber to 45 for pistols and 223 to 30-06 for rifles. Here we go. Each caliber comes in 2 forms, blue and silver, the latter having greater penetrating power due to the use of number 6 birdshot rather than number 12.
Yep. Actually, interesting story was actually when I bought my my Colt 1908, when the guy pulled it out of his safe. When he cleared it, out popped a blue tip 25, and I literally said to him, "What the hell do you think this thing's going to do?"
Oh yeah, the 25 is already a little bit anemic as it is. I wouldn't want to be shot with one, but
yeah, no, I mean, none of this stuff is where you're going to be shot with, and again, you could still die from getting shot by it, but the stopping power of it is extremely dubious.
Well,
Yep, go ahead.
One always kind of intrigued me was the extreme shock, because I remember seeing it in the gun magazines advertised, like the back pages, and I don't know. I remember looking up the box of truth and having the owner of Extreme Shot send him some ammo, and he tested it. And he just was not very kind to it.
No. I mean, it's. I mean, any sort of thing that's asking for a magic bullet. I mean, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different name brand stuff, but they're all really. I mean, they've all got their own little ideas that may or may not work better than that, but it's all pretty much the same old technology of just you want that round to hit the target, open up, hold as much of its mass as it can, and expand as it's going through the tissues of the body. And when suddenly somebody says they've come up with something completely brand new that's going to revolutionize the world and going to fix all of that stuff, you've gotta be a little bit wary. And yeah, a lot of these extreme shock, and then the very very new the G2 research RIP ammo is another example of it, where that's a solid copper round that's all laser cut in a million different ways, so that as soon as it starts, when a normal hollow point would expand, this stuff just breaks apart into a bunch of little pieces. And there was a video when that round first came out of a guy with a gel that looked like it had been shot with an extreme shot, but he realized that but then he noted that he had shot it with 2 or 3 .22 rounds. One standard 22, which created the base of the round that stays intact, and then one of the segmented hollow points that I think is made by is that CCI? I think CCI is the one that makes the segmented hollow point that breaks into 3 pieces.
Yeah.
And that was creating the petals. I think he shot it with 2 of the segmenteds and one of the solid cores, and that created the exact same wound track, and it was just a 22.
Well, here I'm looking at the Box of Truth right now, so this is from them, and he did a test on the Extreme Shock ammo, and I guess they offered 2 different types, and I don't know if they still offer it now. This was quite a while ago. They were still advertising, but the first one he tested was the Extreme Shock 9mm 124 grain, advertised as the Explosive Entry Fang Face Enhanced Penetration. It's a compressed tungsten nitrillium composite fragmenting round. It does have some really impressive looking fangs on the front of it, but from what I see on here, it did not perform the greatest. And then there was the second ammo was the 9mm 85 grain Air Freedom round. So this was supposedly to reduce overpenetration and ricochet characteristics, and they were quote unquote nothing short of revolutionary.
Well, it certainly did reduce ricochet and overpenetration.
Because it broke up into a powder when it hit anything.
Mm-hmm.
So what about the new G2 RIP stuff that everybody was talking about? I see it's been pretty well ripped in the press over the past few months.
Yeah, it's the round itself breaks up into a couple of different petals, and those guys fly off as like little flechettes. And then the base of the bullet keeps going through. But I mean, the rounds are extremely light. They're going at actually, I don't think they're going all that fast. I'm trying to remember. A lot of these guys that make the super duper light ammo, they're pushing them at crazy velocities, which does have some advantages to it. But I don't think these. I think these things were loaded slow, and they break all up and they produce a fairly shallow wound track, and just you're getting hit with a bunch of little teeny tiny bullets.
Now, what about the I think it's the Lehigh Defense ammo that I've seen. That doesn't seem to me so much as the sort of the quote unquote magic ammo that people come out with, the boutique stuff that they try to say, oh, this is the new latest greatest thing, but they do laser cuts down the edge of the bullet, and it just has extreme expansion. I've seen like 45 rounds that are cut almost to the base of the bullet, and I believe they're solid copper, and when you see them expanded, there are just 4 massive petals that have come out. Have you ever seen anything on those?
I haven't seen those. I'm actually trying to remember, actually. A few years back at the NRA show, I saw a guy, I think it was called Grizzly Defense was the name of it. And this guy was making solid copper rounds that were cut in a similar way. And they essentially opened up into 4 gigantic petals. And he's since come out now with a 45 Colt load that's designed to go in the Taurus Judge and the Smith & Wesson Governor, where it's the same length as a 2.5 inch 410 shell. So it's just got this big, huge, long bullet, and the thing does, if it, at least in gel, and I've seen it in gel and I've seen it in wood, opens up to, I think the thing's almost 1 inch wide. It's huge. It just turns into this gigantic cross-shaped round, but I don't really know how well it works in practice. I mean, these are lesser used rounds, so I don't know how it works in real life scenarios, but they're certainly interesting.
One thing these ammunition companies need to stop using is the word game changer, because that's immediately a red flag to me, just an FYI.
Yep.
So we'll kind of move on into unless you have any more of the exotic rounds to talk about.
No, I don't have anything else off the top of my head.
All right, so we'll move into the ones that generally are used by most armed civilians and police. And honestly, if you're someone who's looking for, oh, what ammo should I use? Oftentimes the best thing you can do is go ask your local police department. You know a local police officer or something. Hey, what ammunition do you guys carry? And you'll probably find out they either carry Spear Gold Dot, Winchester Ranger, SXT or T, or Federal HydroShock HST, or I don't believe any carry Guard Dog. Some of them do carry Golden Saber or the new what's the new Remington round? Is it SXT or something like that, or is that Winchester?
SXT I think is Winchester. But
okay.
Yeah, there's a couple of different Remington ones.
That's what my SIG P226 is loaded with, 124 grain SXT 9mm. So what's your experience with the HydroShock, Weerd?
Actually, HydroShock was the first hollow point ammo I ever carried. It was the 230 grain 45 ACP standard pressure load. And those ones have, I think it's been debunked, but they've got a little center post coming out of the middle of it. So when you look down into the hollow point cavity, there's essentially a little post sticking up out of the middle of it that's made out of lead. And that was designed to keep the round from clogging, say if it hit clothing or drywall or something like that, so that it would suddenly behave like a full metal jacket. And I don't think it worked nearly as well as advertised, but it's still a great round. It works. I mean, they're all, they wouldn't still exist if they weren't great. And that stuff works well. I've actually since upgraded up to the federal HST, and that's simply because, number one, I can get a plus P45 in there. If I can push that round a little faster, why not? And it's not noticeably more recoil, so I'm 100% fine with it, and all my guns are safe to shoot plus P loads. And it's also a bonded jacket, so the idea is that in some instances, some of these rounds, when they go in, the lead core can actually fall out of the jacket and create a separate wound track. And again, that's essentially a lighter bullet going off in a different direction than the jacket is going through. And I'm generally not a huge fan of that idea. I like my rounds to be retaining as much weight as possible.
Well, and one interesting round that Federal came out with was the Guard Dog, and there was some talk on the Gun Nation regarding that hollow point case in New Jersey that just recently happened with a woman who drove in and she had hollow points in her carry gun. So basically, the Guard Dog is a quote-unquote hollow point that you can't see the hollow point. It has a large ball of polymer underneath a thin outer jacket. I don't know whether it's made out of copper or some other soft material that's been scored down the side. So when it hits, that front end, it's flat-fronted, and it's compressed like a hollow point, so it does expand, but it's not, at visual inspection, it is not a hollow point. And I believe those were made in lighter bullet weights to kind of allow people to, shoot inside a home, specifically for home defense, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's specifically for home defense, though I know a bunch of people in New Jersey who have that as their ammo, because that does allow you to have something close to hollow point performance. All the tests I've seen, they don't expand nearly as big as a lot of them, but they are expanding and they are dumping energy, so they're really great rounds. I would have no qualms about carrying that stuff. I mean, they work really well, and certainly there's no hollow point cavity to clog up, so that issue is also not there.
I gotta give credit to Average Joe over there, because he said that New Jersey is the only state to follow the Hague Convention.
Yeah.
I just don't understand it. I'm not sure they understand what the other, what the unintended consequence is, because now you have people using FMJ, so it's almost guaranteed that every defensive shooting in New Jersey is going to be way more dangerous than it needs to be.
Oh yeah, plus also the fact that now you're suddenly needing to put more rounds into somebody, because if you don't hit anything vital with that first shot, you got to try again. And so
Right.
it's never a good idea. But I think this was all came out during the Winchester Black Talon controversy going through, which was all a bunch of smoke and mirrors and foolishness. And the Ranger T is essentially an upgraded version of the Black Talon,
Without
just
the
in
black coating.
yeah, just in copper. But oh man, there was all sorts of claims about whether it would penetrate ballistic vests, or that it was gonna, it was designed to kill doctors trying to pull the round out of people, and just all sorts of awful stuff going through. Where it was just a nicely designed hollow point.
Now, my favorite load that I carry in most of the guns that I use is the Spear Gold Dot. The only exception is my P226, which I have the SXT from Winchester, I believe. I carry the 135 grain Gold Dot snubby load and my 38 Special Model 60. And then I've used the Gold Dot also in 380 ACP, where I found it's been pretty effective as well. So the Gold Dot is really a proven street load. I know a lot of police departments use that. I believe Chicago and NYPD use that snubby load that I talked about. And I guess they've had some pretty exemplary performance with it. So have you used the Gold Dot at all, Weerd?
Yeah, that's my 357 load is Gold Dots. They make actually, they're fantastic ammo, and again, that's a bonded round, so you're not going to have jacket separation, so you're going to have more weight retention.
Now, moving into the Winchester, I mean, we've basically touched upon that. That's the Ranger T, which is essentially the quote-unquote deadly black Talon without the black coating. And a lot of police departments will use that. Moving, though, into the Hornady, this is one that you don't see a lot of police departments use. You see a lot more armed civilians using the Hornady rounds. I've personally used the XTP. That's my go-to hunting load for my 357 Magnum, and that's what I load in. That's what I used 2 years ago when I was out hunting, 158 grain. And then they have the critical duty and the critical defense. I've heard so things about the critical defense rounds. I believe they're loaded a little bit lighter for people who may be recoil sensitive. So I kind of consider those to be like the low recoil shotgun shells of the handgun world, where you have the critical duty, which are full power 9mm and 45 stuff, loaded up with that polymer tip in the hollow point to help keep stuff, foreign material, out of the hollow point and help aid expansion when it does hit.
Yep, they're great rounds. I mean, I gotta say, I like the idea of them filling the tip, and of course the XTP. Yeah, I know a lot of people who swear by that round. And also, if you happen to be somebody who carries a Makarov or a CZ82 or something like that, they make a 9x18 XTP load, so you can have yourself a good. You don't have to deal with the brown bear and silver bear hollow points, which do not expand when they hit.
Well, then one thing to make a note of before we head into the last one here, a lot of the smaller rounds may not have hollow points simply because the velocities of those rounds, like we talked about before, won't allow the hollow points to reliably expand. I've heard of good performance with the 32 ACP and Winchester Silvertip. I have not heard of really any good performance of anything in 25 ACP besides FMJ, and you would probably know more, Weerd. You've probably shot more 25 than I have.
Yeah, I mean, I've never shot any of the expensive stuff because why bother? 25 is not the cheapest round in the world. I do know that Caleb Giddings at Gun Nuts Media for a long time carried a little Beretta Jetfire, and he had him loaded with actually Spear Gold Dots, Spear Gold Dot 25s. And I asked him, I said, why would you do that? Aren't you worried that the round's going to open up and expand? And he goes, nope, I've tested on it. The round does not open up and expand. He goes, it's just a nice hot 25 load. So I'm banking on it not expanding because, I mean, again, these rounds are not very powerful, and so penetration's really going to be a big issue. It's just you want that round to get deep enough so that it can get deep enough with enough energy that if it hits an organ or an artery or something like that or bone, that it's actually going to do damage to it. And these rounds just don't have a lot of round energy to it. So if they're expanding up and they're slowing down, it's not going to do you any favors.
And basically, the last one here is the Golden Saber from Remington, and that's also a very popular one with a lot of police departments. But basically, anything from this list, and some of the lesser brands, like I've carried PMC Starfire in my 38 Special before. So, they'll probably do fine for you, but the internet is a great resource. Use it with caution, obviously. But one thing to note on these rounds versus buying the bullets and loading them yourself is the company tests the rounds at the expected muzzle velocities. So a 148 grain, 147 grain rather, 9x19 bullet will be designed to expand at slower speeds than the 115 grain 9mm bullet. So pushing a low velocity round very fast may result in you have the jacket separate from the lead core, fragmentation, and then pushing a high velocity round too slow might result in the bullet not expanding. So you want to be aware of that when you're doing any hand loading, and honestly, there's a huge discussion on this as well. I personally would not carry any rounds that I've hand loaded. I would only use those if I absolutely had to, because that's just one thing I don't want to have to defend in the court of law if I am involved in a defensive shooting.
Well, another big thing about that is that, these rounds are all sealed up nice, and match grade. I'm just so worried about getting like a bunk round, or not pushing it at the exact right velocity of what they're doing, because it's not like you can find out what powder these guys are putting in their bullets. And some of these ammo companies are even using mixes of powders in there, and that's not something you're going to do in handguns. But when you're dealing with a big company like Speer or Federal or Winchester or all that, they can do all the research they want and figure out what's the best way to drive that round exactly the way they want to. Also, another interesting thing to talk about, you just glanced over the Golden Sabers, but one reason why that round is so popular is that probably has one of the least aggressive hollow points out there. It's generally got like a ball round profile when you look at it, and a lot of reasons why a lot of people picked that up was some of the earlier guns. Any gun that's made these days, if it's a modern production gun, as general rule is going to feed hollow points. I've never had any issue with a gun that was made in the last 10, 15, even 20 years where it's not going to eat hollow points reliably. But some of the older guns, say you've got an old World War II era 1911, it's absolutely great carry gun, but as a general rule they don't like hollow points nearly as much unless you polish it and throw it out the feed ramp and do all sorts of gunsmithing to them. And but the Golden Sabers is very, very close to that that 45 ball profile, and so that round is going to feed just like the ammo that gun was designed to eat, which was ball ammo.
Well, and like the bullets I load into my 1903, when I reload, I have a box of Hornady XTP 32 bullets, and the Hornady XTP retains an FMJ profile, and it has a very small, doesn't really even have a hollow point cavity on it. And I don't doubt they're probably not expanding from that 32 round, but it's just that'll help improve the feeding reliability. And I've also heard the same thing from the Winchester Silver Tips. They have that FMJ profile without a really huge hollow point cavity, which allows you to maybe have a little bit of improved feeding reliability with those older handguns. So is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up the main topic, Weerd?
No, I think we've covered it all pretty good. This is a super duper fun thing, and it's always fun slaying sacred cows of going, oh no, your favorite carry ammo sucks, and God forbid we say that 9mm can be just as good as 45.
Well, that's kind of evident in the whole. The Army wants to switch to something more modular and powerful, and then the FBI says, well, we want to go down to 9mm. So no one knows, even at 2014. Well,
the Army's dealing with ball rounds though, so that actually makes perfect sense. If you're going to be shooting somebody with a ball round, better make it as big a round as possible. Be it 45 or even 40, because 40's almost all 40 rounds were designed in that hollow point generation. So 40s all have that hollow point profile where they've got the flat nose to them. So that's just gonna add a little bit more of a wound profile than something that's gonna try to skate through like a conical 9mm bullet.
Well, remember, in war we need to shoot people nicely.
Yes.
So that about go ahead.
Right there, just the whole why, I get the idea of why they first invented it. Is they first had like some crazy frangible rounds that were being used, like the actual original Dum Dum bullets made out of the Dum Dum factory in India. Those ones would, put chunks of bullets all over everywhere. So when the surgeons were trying to patch the person up, they would be hunting around all over the place. And, oh, here's another piece. Oh, here's another piece. That makes perfect sense, but it's also not the greatest round anymore, and it's not like they're making dum-dum bullets anymore. Even though if you read some crappy pulp novels, they'll talk about people loading up their ammo with dum-dum bullets.
So that about wraps up the main topic, discussion of bullets and ballistics. So we're going to head into the wrap-up section and the obscure, non-existent gun we want. So, you've heard in the past few weeks, we have the new segment, the obscure or non-existent gun we want. And this is a new segment where we get to pick a gun that is obscure, that we simply want just because we want it, or a gun that isn't made that we want to see made. So money is no object, and it's purely a thought exercise, so the goal is to just have fun with it. So myself, I want to see not so much a specific gun, but I want a company to come back and have old guns replicated. Now, I know there was a company that was doing replicas of the Baby Browning. I think it was PSA or something like that. I don't know if they're still doing it. But I would love to see a company come back and do replicas of, like, the C96 broom handle, the Borchardt pistol, the one that was one of the first semi-autos, the Mars automatic that we talked about on the episode with Ian from Forgotten Weapons, Colt 1903, stuff like that. Be able to get the patents and remake these old guns with modern materials and try to stay as true to the old thing as possible. And I understand it may be a boutique company. They may only sell, 50 guns a year. But it would be awesome to see someone have the capital and the know-how to be able to replicate all those old firearms with the new machinery and the new materials. And you could really make some awesome heirloom pieces for people. Can you imagine a 1903 made with the metals that we have today, made with the CNC machinery we have today, but still retaining the quality and the craftsmanship of the older guns? I just think that would be awesome.
Yeah, no, that would definitely really cool. There's definitely a lot of limitations with some of those older guns with just the technology they had at the time.
So what was your pick, Weerd, for the obscure or non-existent gun?
Well, as many know, I'm a Mosin Nagant collector, and some of the Mosin Nagants that I'm actually really, really interested in are the ones that were not made by communists. And in my collection, I have a White Army 1891 that was made in the Tula Arsenal in 1898, and so that's technically not a gun. I also have a New England Westinghouse 1891, which was made in Massachusetts, and it's not really sure. They're all stamped 1915, but it's somewhere around, I think, between 1915 and 1917. They made a whole bunch of them, and some of them went to Russia, and some never did. I don't think mine ever made it across the pond, but I'm still doing research on it, and it's really a problematic research thing to try to figure out where the heck this gun came from. Especially mine has a Krag Jorgensen bayonet lug, a U.S. Krag Jorgensen bayonet lug on it. And so some people have said that that's possibly was a Connecticut National Guard rifle, and so they had that bayonet lug installed on it so that it could take the U.S. bayonets at the time. But so the one that's missing from my collection is Remington actually made a whole bunch of 1891s for the Imperial Russian forces. And I believe that was also another system where the Imperial Russian forces didn't pay their bill properly, so a lot of them stayed in the United States or went into U.S. forces going into Russia and stuff like that. But they're out there and they're pretty common. I've seen a whole bunch of them that are just in horrible shape and guns that I don't even want. Nothing short of a wall hanger. Actually, I got a chance to. I didn't actually shoot it, but there was a shoot up here in Massachusetts. If you look up Tactical Mosin. This guy had an 1891 Remington, and it was just part of a horse trade deal that he had. It was just throw that in a box of shells and a few things. Okay, now we're square. And the barrel was all shot out and rusted. It hadn't been properly cleaned, and the stock was all ruined. And I think it had been sporterized before, so the gun was worthless as far as a collector's piece go. So he went and paid the NFA tax and chopped the barrel down to, I think, 14 inches or so, put a flash hider on the end of it, mounted a red dot scope on the top of it, and put an AR-15 stock on the back of it. And that thing with a short barrel on it, oh my God, it was a flashbang. It was quite a spirited muzzle blast. But I'd like to get my hands on an all original piece, all matching serial numbers if I can, though I'm not going to be choosy about that, but something that doesn't have a sewer pipe for a bore.
I remember reading a story in one of the surplus gun magazines that there was a Russian inspector that used to go around the Remington plant, and he would test some of the guns right off the line, some of the Mosin Nagants, and he would grab a gun right off the line. He would take and slam the butt of it. He'd load around, and he would slam the butt of it down on the ground so hard that he was cracking some of the stocks. And so I guess a bunch of the factory workers got pissed at him, so they took one of the rifles that he was going to inspect, and they filed the sear down so it was razor thin. And he took and he slammed the butt of the gun down, and the gun went off and sent a round up into a water pipe, and the water pipe exploded and sent all this water down on top of him. I don't know if they intended the water pipe part of it, but it's just like, it's amazing what safety was back in the early 1900s.
Well, I mean, especially when you look at the safety of the Mosin, that weird thing where you have to pull the striker back and essentially lock it up against the receiver, and it's one of those. I can't imagine anybody ever having to do that to get their gun going. And I hear people talking about hunting with their Mosins, and I wonder, are you carrying it around with a round in the chamber and the safety on? Or a lot of people I know carry it with they load 4 rounds in and push the top round down and run the action closed over that. So when they see when they see the deer they want, they can just quickly chamber around and then take their shot.
Yeah. Excellent. So that about wraps that up. So we're going to head into the wrap-up here. Don't forget to shop Brownells using our affiliate link, handgunradio.com/Brownells. Also, be sure to go like Handgun Radio on Facebook and share it with your friends. And leave us a review on iTunes. It really helps the show in the iTunes standings. Also, listen to all the great shows on the Firearms Radio Network, including the Off-Road Podcast with Greg Bakken from Tactical Paradise fame. And be sure to visit the Firearms Insider for reviews and SHOT Show 2014 coverage. And also, if you're interested in writing reviews for the Firearms Insider, please email tj@firearmsradio.tv. And then also, be sure to check out the Firearms Radio Network on YouTube. And Weerd, where can people find you?
You can find me over at weirdworld.com. That's my blog. And every Thursday night at the same time as we do this show is the Squirrel Report. And that is not a family-friendly show, so you can say shit and fuck and all that other stuff on there. I had to say that just so you have to bleep me.
Oh, now I got to do a bunch of editing. Excellent. So that about wraps up this week's episode. So until next week, have fun and safe shooting.